queens of ancient Nubian. I wanted to, an ancient Kemet. So they are Nubian queens of Kemet. So I wanted to talk to you a little bit about ancient Kemet and some Nubian queens there. And I'll kind of go ahead and minimize this so we can kind of get started here and start talking about this. And I wanted to talk a little bit about it because I've been talking about it for the past couple of days, and I kind of wanted to wrap up that conversation around some of the Nubian queens of ancient Kemet during the 11th dynasty, in particular wives of Mentuhotep II. And I wanted to talk about that a little bit and kind of get started with that because it's such a significant thing to me, and I think it's important. And I think it's important to lift up these women as we think about women who are in history and important women in history. It's important to think about women who come from all walks of life, women who've had significant roles and significant things they've done in their lives with respect to history. And ancient Kemet is one of the places, as well as many places around, but in particular in Africa, that one of the places where women had a chance to shine, where you saw women, female deities like you see right here, leading the pharaohs, where you saw women who were queens and that type of thing, and women who had significant roles to play in the country, in the administration of the country, and in the religion. Because if you can't see God in yourself, then who are you going to be able to look up to? Who are you going to be able to address? Or how are you going to be able to do things in your life if you can't see God in yourself? And if you can't see God in someone else, you're probably not going to respect them as much. So it's very important to have an understanding of everyone's divinity and the contributions that everyone makes. So I want to talk about that a little bit. So as we talk about that, I want to kind of give us just some time frame and kind of go back a little bit and talk about just where we're coming from with respect to these Nubian queens and who they are and what we're talking about. Because as I talk about that and we get started, there are several queens who were part of the temple that Mentuhotep developed and made in the 11th dynasty in the southern part of ancient Kemet. And as you know, Mentuhotep was the pharaoh, was the king who helped to unite Egypt when it was after its first intermediate period, when it was a period of time of separation between the north and the south. He was somebody who helped to reunite the lands, and he became the joiner of the two lands. He became the person who started and ushered in the Middle Kingdom. And you can look at this right here. This is a book that was done back in 1910 and early 1900s. And it talks about the 11th dynasty. It talks about his temple and the excavation of his temple. And so a lot of these things that we find that we're talking about and some of the things that I'm sharing with you, these are things that have been around for, since the early 1900s, late 1800s. They've been around. We've known the information. We have the information. It's been excavated. It's been talked about. Obviously the temple itself was around, obviously, for thousands of years, more than 4,000 years. But in terms of modern archaeology, a lot of the content that we talk about has been around for well over 100 years, since the early 1900s. And we know these things, but we really don't talk about them. And somehow it doesn't make its way into our history books. It doesn't make its way into what our children learn and what they've taught and what people have been learning since the early 1900s about ancient Kemet and things of that nature. So we're going to talk about them. We're going to lift these women up today. So this particular book here by Edouard Naville, you can look at him and you see it's the 11th dynasty temple, and it talks about just the excavation of Mentuhotep's temple, and it talks about the queens, and you can notice some of the queens that it mentions right there. As I'll get you right there, at the very, very top, you'll see it mentions the titles of the queens. And one of the queens that it mentioned was Queen Ashait. And Queen Ashait was just a beautiful name and a beautiful person. They found in the tomb of Mentuhotep II, they found the tombs of several of his wives who were priestesses of Hathor. And not only did they find the tombs themselves, they found pictures and color paintings and color depictions of who they were and what they looked like and how the artist saw them. And so it's an amazing thing. And I'll show you just one of the depictions of Ashait. You can see this right here. This is her. She was a black woman. She was a Nubian woman. And this is her. This is a depiction of what they found in her tomb, in her shrine, in her chapel, if you will, in her shrine, what she looked like. And she's sitting there, she's sniffing the flower, she's smelling the flower. And she was a queen, and she is recognized in terms of what they saw here as one of his significant queens, one of his significant people who were part of the royal court. And so you see it at the very top line on the left-hand side. It says the titles of Queen Ashait, they were very specific things. They call him the royal wife, the one who loves him, who is the royal favorite, the only one, who is the priestess of Hathor, who is favored by Osar. So Osiris is the Greek name for Osar. Saying, a lot of times you hear people say things and they talk about titles of queens. You don't always hear them either say or hear it mentioned that they may have been given the same type of glory and the same type of titles as it relates to Asar. They'll say, the Asar queen so-and-so, or they'll say she is favored by the Asar, or favored by the person of the Western, the deities of the West. And you find that, so we see a lot of that language used when it comes to kings, or you use when maybe it comes to scribes. But a lot of times we don't talk about how those same titles and titles of glory and titles of respect were put upon women and were put upon queens. And here are some examples of that in terms of referring them to as royal favorites, as well as referring to them as being favored by a Sar, being a favorite of God, being a favorite of the God of who oversees the afterlife and who is a representation of man's divinity on earth. So they mentioned Queen Ashait here, but also just to look at and lift up some of the other women. You can see on the other side here at the very top, there's Queen Sadhe and Henheset and Kowit and Kemset and Temmate. And these are some of the women who were found, who were buried underneath the columns and tombs in this pyramid that, over 4,000 years ago, in this wonderful pyramid and complex that he developed over 4,000 years ago. And as we talk about these women, we talk about the role that they play. We mentioned a little bit of that yesterday, that being priestesses of Hathor was a significant thing. It wasn't just as if they were just performing some ceremonies that had no meaning. The idea of Hathor, or Het-Heru, which we talked about yesterday, Het-Heru, as being the house or the vessel of Heru, the house of Heru, that which brings forth your will, that which gives nursing to and brings forth what the king is supposed to represent. The king was supposed to be a Heru on earth. He was supposed to be the son, the bodily son of Ra, the son of Asar, the son of Isis and of Aset, and a living image, a living embodiment of Heru, the person who was right to be on the throne, the person who rules by righteousness, by morality, and had the right to the throne and was living on earth in behalf of God, manifesting his divinity. That's what the king was supposed to represent in Heru. And the king represented that, and Heru represented that as a manifestation of, as being coming forth and nursing his will and nursing his divinity, nursing his ability to come forth with respect to Het-Heru. That Hathor was what nursed the king. A lot of times you might see certain depictions of Het-Heru actually nursing a king or suckling a king, that type of thing. Hathor was the one who gave birth and nourished and nurtured the king into his full manhood, into his full glory, into his full rightfulness, if you will. And so that role that a priestess of Hathor would play, a priestess of Het-Heru, was a significant. It wasn't a play one. She was supposed to be interceding on behalf of the king. She was supposed to be praying on behalf of the king. She was supposed to be helping him bring forth his divinity and to be all who he could be. And so certainly somebody like that would have been somebody that King Mentuhotep II would have not just disrespected. He would have not been in a situation where he's like, I don't respect this, or putting down necessarily the queens or putting down their roles as priestesses, because he would have understood. And in all accounts, all of things say, the information that we have about him, the information that was in his tomb and in his pyramid, it clearly indicates that he was very serious about his religion. He was very serious about his beliefs and his divinity. And a lot of the worship of and the veneration of Amen that they did in the New Kingdom in the area of Waset, where his temple was kind of ushered in by him, because he ended up establishing his temple, the capital of Kemet in the south, in Waset, where the New Kingdom would also keep it and maintain it. And he ends up building this incredible pyramid and temple where he has where his wives are buried, where he talks about Amen a lot and talks about himself as in terms of divinity, himself as a divine being. And so that it clearly indicates that he was serious about his religion. He was serious about his beliefs. So his beliefs and how he would have seen his wives would have also been serious. It would have been something that we're not disrespecting them. It would have been something that, the idea of maybe calling them out of their names. A lot of times today we do things like, say it's okay and laugh off, people calling each other out of names, or men or other women calling women out of their names, calling them female dogs or things like that. Imagine that. Imagine believing and understanding that the women you have in your life are nurturing your divinity. They are helping you to be successful. They're literally praying for you. They're literally going to mat. They're literally actualizing power on behalf of God for you. Intercessing with God for you and going to the mat for you, and then calling someone who's a priestess, who should be a queen, out of her name. I mean, to me, that would seem like just unideal and just the antithesis of what you want to do. And so you see a lot of the representations of what they left behind with respect to their women, with respect to queens, with respect to the women in general, as being respected. As I mentioned, as you saw on here, the titles that they're given in terms of royal favorites, favorite of Asar, the titles that they're given are those of respect. I wonder if somebody 5,000 years from now went back and looked at how we treated women, what depictions do we leave? So we may not have everything left on a wall. We may have videos, we may have music, we may have songs, we may have things that you can see. How did men or people in general or women in general respect women and respect themselves? That record, I think, will be very different. Unfortunately, hopefully it'll change. But if I compare what they're talking about in terms of the women in antiquity and Queen Ashayet and Kemet and XIth, and these women, these beautiful women who are remarkable, who are serious in what they do, with how we treat and talk about women today, it's remarkable. It's so different. So I wanted to lift their names up. I wanted to shout that out there. If you have any questions, please let me know. I'll be looking down the comments and the chat with respect to that. But I just wanted to lift these women's names up and to have us remember them. Please remember. Let's talk about them, and let's talk about what that idea is to lift up our men, not only lift up our men, but lift up our children, and also respect and lift up our women who are queens and should be queens. So thank you so much. God bless you. I hope you have a good day, and leave any comments you have, because I'll be taking a look at that. I appreciate it very much. Thank you.